All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luke Anderson. I am the Executive Director for Prevention Supports and Services at Placer County Office of Education, and I am excited to be with you here as we launch the 2025 California PBIS Recognition System. As a reminder that all of our recognition documents and the application will be linked at pbisca.org. You can see the website there. We'll be referencing several documents and resources that will be available there. As we move through our webinar and think about recognition, we want to remind folks of our PBIS recognition expectation. The first one, of course, is to be responsible. So all members of California PBIS and applying schools should ensure accurate data is used for recognition. All materials should be reviewed carefully, and the level of recognition should match, of course, the data provided. Be respectful. First and foremost, know that the folks that support California PBIS are, generally speaking, all volunteering to do so, and that everybody in California PBIS and all applying schools should use kind and professional communication. And then lastly, and most importantly, we want you to know that you're awesome, and we want you to act in accordance. Celebrate your hard work, enjoy the recognition process, and be inspired by the work of our PBIS community. All right, earlier I mentioned that there are recognition resources galore. So just a few things that will be on our website. Most important one is the criteria at a glance document. We will share that today during the webinar. We also produce videos for each recognition criteria. Those are coming soon, but those will be available very shortly. We do recognition worksheets that match the application perfectly. The application is long, so we encourage you to use those worksheets. There'll be a FAQ and then a number of documents that are also referenced, like the culturally responsive field guide. Those will all be at pbisca.org/apply for recognition. All right. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on our website. Usually takes us a day or two to process that. You are in a Zoom webinar. So Zoom webinar does not allow attendees to turn their cameras on. There's about 700 of us on this call, so that's good. There'll be a lot of little cameras or a lot of little screens. So no camera, no microphone, but we do have the Q&A feature, which is where we're going to ask that you post any questions that you may have as we're going through the webinar today. So use that Q&A feature. And again, know that these slides are going to be posted in the chat, and we'll post them on our website as well. Let's hit that agenda. We're going to go over California PBIS. We will introduce the recognition system. We'll touch on the criteria specifically, but we're not going to do a deep dive in those, just know that. And then we'll hit the timeline. We'll talk about our region lead contacts. So California PBIS is regionalized into 11 regions, and we'll help you figure out who your region leads are. And then last, we'll do closing, and if we have time, we'll do additional Q&A at that point. All right, so what is this California PBIS? We always do these slides. So we want you to know in 2012, our current group, California PBIS, was established as the California PBIS Coalition. So if you're logging on, you're thinking, I thought you all were named the California PBIS Coalition. Know that we did a name change recently. So that's why that change has happened. And why we exist, we're dedicated to providing a standard of quality practice for PBIS through the work of regional technical assistance centers. So those are our 11 regional technical assistance centers. And those centers all emphasize systematic implementation, and we anchor that content to implementation science and the resources provided to us by our partners at the Center on PBIS. So long story short, 11 regions, and then we do PBIS with a lot of intensity to help you achieve those valued outcomes that you have. All right, so are we achieving those outcomes? Whenever we look at data, we want to ask three questions. The first one is are schools implementing PBIS in California, right? So what is our scope? Last school year, 3,173 schools in California used one of the data tools available at PBISapps.org. So that's a little less than a third of schools in our beautiful state. It was also the most ever. You can see we've generally had a inclining trend. We took a dip with COVID, and we've been climbing ever since. So lots of schools use PBIS. The next question we ask is, are those schools able to implement PBIS as intended? And that's when we start looking at our fidelity data. Carrie switches over to the next slide. Thank you. Across the year, so from 2014-15 until last school year, in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, we have seen increases in fidelity. So last school year, the average tiered fidelity inventory score, which is the assessment that we use to measure the extent that PBIS is implemented at the school site. The average score for Tier 1 was 82.62%, 83.40% for Tier 2, and at Tier 3, 79.25%. And my tiered fidelity inventory mavens know that 70% and above is average. So, excuse me, 70% or above is considered at fidelity. So on average, in California, with all these schools implementing, we are above that threshold. Very good to see. All right, so we ask how many folks are doing it? Are they able to do it? And then the last question we ask is there a benefit to doing PBIS? So right now we have 3, we'll have more at some point soon. Peer-reviewed journal articles documenting the success and the student level outcomes of PBIS in California. So our colleagues at the University of Florida were the researchers on all 3 of these. And in some instances, they looked at data available from the TFI directly. In some instances, they actually used data available from PBIS Recognition. And what they find is that schools that implement PBIS at Tier 1 and or at Tier 2 and 3 generally have better outcomes than their similarly matched schools. So schools that do PBIS generally have better outcomes, including fewer suspensions, school exclusions, fewer referrals to restrictive environments for students with special needs. So good stuff. All right, let's keep moving here. All right, last thing I'll point out here, I think we have one animation on this, Carrie, is that California PBIS recognition has also been increasing. So last year, 2,221 schools received recognition through this process. So we're excited about that. We're very proud of that. And who helped make that happen? Well, that was our recognition team. These are their lovely faces. The folks with stars by their pictures are on the call today. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jeremy Sawtell, to talk about our why for recognition.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we're here, the whole recognition process, it really is just an opportunity to reflect, to celebrate, and really have all of us, the school sites, to be able to just see what it looks like to have implementation truly happen and really sustain that school-wide PBIS. So it helps with community building and identifying exemplar schools and just helping us kind of configure and figure out, like, where can we look to show, hey, PBIS is really going well in these places, and just to really highlight the great work that is happening across California. And as we know, when we go through the application process, the walkthroughs, and the whole recognition, it's something to where and we'll be getting to that slide of our timeline, but toward the end of the year, schools receive the decal to be able to display in emails. You can have posters made, and just to be able to help represent that across your school site. We also feature these school names on our PBIS website. And then there's that great acknowledgement in October. Hope to see you all there at the annual conference in Sacramento, where we highlight and to be able to really show the great work that's happening within PBIS across California. So here's our timeline for the 2025 year. You'll notice that right now, welcome, our January 27th. This is our introduction kind of overview webinar. We do encourage you after this session to reach out to your technical assistance center. So on the California PBIS website, you'll be able to see that TA center breakdown. If you have any further questions about the recognition process, now's the time to be kind of opening up those lines of communication and reaching out. The application window also, as you see there, same time today, and then the window will be closing May 9th, and we will be sharing out the results of the recognition process in September, and then again, seeing you hopefully all at the conference in October. And then you'll notice there, all of the components that you'll need can be found at pbisca.org. Couple of changes that have gone through. We've revised our ACER process. That was kind of a year of work for our ACER committee and the California PBIS leadership team. We're very excited about where we're headed with ACER 2.0. You'll see here on the slide just kind of the who, when, why, what, where, and how of ACER 2.0. But the purpose, it's really critical in this ACER process to have outside perspective, really facilitate the TFI, complete those walkthroughs, and have somebody external to the school site be pretty well trained in what the look-fors are, how the kind of ACER process should be going, and then we have our full certification process that I'll cover on the next slide. So those of you who are unfamiliar with our ACER 2.0, there is the four-step process here of readiness, a training, an assessment, and then the certification. Currently, as of January 24th, we have 199 ACER 2.0s across California. We're so excited about that. And congratulations to those of you who are on the call who have completed the process so far. It is something that we are saying, if you have not started this and you're planning to be an ACER, please take a look at our website at the link there at the top on our state recognition component of our website where it says ACER 2.0 to learn more. And again, reach out to your local TA center. We'll be happy to answer any questions about this process. And finally, as we're looking into this recognition application, and we'll be covering the criteria right now, but getting started, everything that you need is on that website, along with the updated list of certified ACERs. So if they're not found on that drop-down list, that means that they have not gone through this process, and we can't really verify that they are an ACER 2.0. So only ACER 2.0s are part of this year's application process. And I will be handing it off to Ralph, and he's going to be sharing our updated 2025 changes to the criteria and some of the great updates we have going.
All right. Good afternoon, folks. You'll see in the chat the link to the criteria at a glance, and I'll give you a moment here to open that up, and then we're going to be going through some of the more salient parts of the criteria. We'll not be covering everything in its entirety, but most of the points, any possible changes, any areas where you really should spend a little more time on, we will focus in on that. So we're always going to start out to obviously we are going to be using the SCOED PBIS tiered fidelity inventory, the TFI. We'll be using version 2.1. I know there may be talk about 3.0 that has not been released. So we're focusing on 2.1. That's going to be key, critical. It's probably going to have some questions about that. 2.1 is the way to go. All right, let's get into criteria 1, which would be to complete the tiered fidelity inventory. And those folks for reaching a bronze level, you must have that TFI completed in the current school year. And they're tiered with an ACER. So as Jeremy went through that. So then for a bronze, you would have to score a 40% or higher. This has not changed. Same as the silver level has stayed the same, a 70% tier 1 or higher. And as we move up to the the gold level here, so tiered 1 TFI would be at 70% and a tier 2 TFI score of 70%. So if you hear me correctly on that, it would be a tier 1 and tier 2 at 70% or higher. And when we move over to platinum, a platinum award would have to look for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, all three at 70% or higher. So that was a change from last year. You can see the upgraded that platinum level will have to be concerned with all three tiers, and gold is only tier 1 and 2. So making sure that we upload our TFI scores into pbisapps.org within our current school year. Also, prior to doing that, we want to make sure that your ACER is certified before the TFI has been completed. So make sure your ACER is on that list, and then they can go ahead and complete the walkthrough and the whole certificate inventory process. Moving on to criteria 2, we're looking at that ODR % data. Let's take a deeper dive into that. So we want to make sure this area usually has some of the more, it's a more of a simple error that will occur. We want to make sure that you add up all the percentages of your ODRs. So we always start with the number of ODRs at 0 and 1. What is that percentage? 2 to 5 and 6 or more, ensuring that the total percentage equals 100. So that when we take a look at that, I want to make sure we're looking at the percentage, not the number of students, the percentage of students who are receiving those ODRs. And how do we get that information? Well, if you're using Swiss, pretty straightforward. Swiss has the capability for you to get that number spit out fairly simply. But if you do not have if you're a non-Swiss user, that's okay. If you have someone who understands your school information system, they could help out. If not, definitely reach out to your regional coach. They will help you, walk you through the steps along the way. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy. Go for it.
Hi there, and the pilot item, the disaggregation of discipline data, has a minor update. You'll see an image there of what it looks like to be able to break data up by student group and really evaluate areas of need. So pilot A, so there's two components here. Question is, does your school have the capacity or the ability to disaggregate suspension and or office referral data based on student groups, example, students with disabilities? If you do not have this ability or capacity, or basically the program to be able to do that, then please complete the online module. So in the application, just like last year, you'll see a yes, we have the ability to do this. No, we do not. And the no, we do not option will take us to an online module to complete it. And then we'll need to document the person's name who completed that module. So if yes, we'll move into the pilot item B. Which student groups are you able to disaggregate by? And you'll see a few options there within the application. Pilot C, so the third piece here. If disproportionality exists in your data, which student group is disciplined disproportionately? So this is an opportunity for us to reflect on our current systems and practices and identify potential areas of focus that's much more data-driven than we've historically done. So we're very excited about the opportunity to kind of learn from this pilot item and you all as you provide us feedback about it. Then the new addition here. What culturally responsive practices or evidence-based practices or alternatives to suspension does your team use to support this specific student group? So you'll see the through line all the way through our pilot item and kind of how each question builds on the next. Again, if you have questions about this, please reach out to your TA center and we'll be able to help navigate this with you. I'll be passing the next piece off for criteria 3 to Denise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denise Granger, a coordinator at the Riverside County Office of Education, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about criteria 3 and 4. Criteria 3 is relatively the same as it has been in past years. We just want to show you one or two things here. So as we move forward, you see that this criteria essentially is helping us as teams get ready for TFI 3.0 that will have more of a mental health focus. But for all 4 award levels, you see here bronze, gold, silver, and platinum, you'll be asked as a team to review a few different documents. So this fact sheet, this ISF fact sheet, we'll want you to review all 3 of them, especially if you're applying for up to platinum. So you can see 101 is like tier 1, 201 is tier 2, 301 is tier 3. And then we'll also want you to review one other resource. So on the next slide, you'll see a couple of options. You'll choose either the 5-point approach to enhancing equity or enhancing school community collaboration with diverse families or PBIS cultural responsive field guide. Your team will need to pick one of those. And then in your application, let us know which one you reviewed. And there's one other document for the gold and platinum applications. That's the integrated TFI companion guide. Now, this is going to come back around. We'll be looking at criteria 4 next also. But if you're applying for these higher level awards, you'll also need as a team to be very familiar with the TFI companion guide. But then the add this year is that all teams, all levels of awardees for whatever you are applying for will want you to follow up with this question. Previously, only the higher level award applications were asked this question, but this year we want to hear from everybody. Essentially, what's one key learning that your team pulled out of the resources that you reviewed? So particularly make sure that you relate this learning to equity or mental health. You see that as the last part of the question, because that's what we're really trying to get ourselves prepared for or more used to doing, is integrating PBIS with mental health. So that's where this question is leading us. And then when we jump over to criteria 4, really not much has changed for criteria 4 this year. However, we wanted to touch base on it again because it was the most commonly missed, or the criteria in which we saw the most mistakes or errors in last year's round of applications. So we want to go through it in a little bit more detail to make sure that we're all on the same page. So again, this is going to refer us back to the TFI companion guide. But what we want to do is essentially we want to see what you as a team are doing for action planning to improve. So we'll want to hear about one feature from the TFI that your team has chosen to improve, and then write an action step or steps that your team will follow. Now, the action steps that you write have to align with the TFI item that you choose. So let's say that you choose TFI item 1.9, then your action steps need to align with the topic of TFI 1.9. So we want to make sure that those 2 items or those 2 answers are aligned. Then we'll need to hear from you who's responsible, and we want you to be as specific as possible, not just say the team, but we'd love to hear a name or a position. And then the date by which the action item should be completed. And this should be a future date. So in other words, it might be the end of the school year when your team is deciding to finish these action items, perhaps next fall, but it should be a future looking date that is included in your action item. And then so here's an example. On the TFI criteria at a glance, by the way, you'll always notice the examples over in the left column. And this is one that's pulled out for item 4. So you want to make sure that the example, for example, says our TFI or tier 1 team will expand our operating procedures to address feature 1.1, and 1.1 is what they chose, you see up above. The team lead, Danae, will invite a classified representative to the tier 1 meeting and recruit multiple parents by September 1st, 2025. So again, that's a forward-looking date. Okay, so we want to make sure that your item aligns with your action steps, and then you've got all the other details filled in as well. That's for bronze and silver. And then for gold and platinum, you also need to reflect or have an integration, show an integration of mental health or equity in your action steps. So again, we're going to refer you back to the Integrated TFI Companion Guide so that you make sure that your action steps are reflecting the TFI Companion Guide. Okay, so those are the notes we want to make sure that you keep in mind for criteria 4. I'm going to pass this back over. Oh, I apologize. There is a couple other details we wanted you to see just to be really specific. So if you chose TFI item 1.1, then perhaps your team noticed that there were family members missing from your team. And so these are the parts of the TFI Companion Guide. This is a snippet from the Companion Guide. These are the parts your team notices that they need to integrate into their action plan. Okay, so you'll notice on the next slide, again, as the example, the team should be comprised of members with a variety of expertise. So those roles need to be included. The action or the TFI Companion Guide really gives you clues then of what should be expanded on in your action steps. So if we look at the example on the next slide, then this has been expanded even more to say she will also attend the parent club meeting in April to recruit parents and report progress at our May Tier 1 team meeting. So we're giving even more information, or your team would be giving even more information on what your action steps tend to be. You'll notice these action steps aren't a huge paragraph. It's maybe 2, 3, 4 sentences. We see a whole variety of answers in length. As long as you're concise and as long as you include all of the details, it doesn't have to be a huge, long novel. We just want to make sure that you cover all of the relevant information. And last but not least, then you'll, for gold and platinum, also report the same thing for tier 2. Bronze and silver, it will just be action steps for a tier 1 item. But for gold and platinum, you'll need to report for a tier 1 TFI item and a tier 2 TFI item. Okay. And for platinum, though, you get the bonus. You're also going to report an action step for tier 3. So same thing, you want to make sure that everything's aligned in those action steps, but for platinum applications, you'll just need to report a TFI item for all 3 tiers. Okay, now I'm going to pass it back to Raf for criteria 5.
Thank you very much, Denise. All right, I love that that little winner there. Here we go, winner chicken dinner. Let's go with criteria 5. So criteria 5 is going to be looking at some advanced tier intervention data. So our intervention teams will be working closely. So that would mean that your bronze and silver level, you're not applicable. This is not something we're going to work at tier 1. We're looking at tier 2 and 3. And from the majority of the application, where are we looking at? That's right, gold and platinum. So let's take a deeper dive in what that looks like. So we've kind of streamlined the process so we can make a clear delineation between gold and platinum. So we start off in the very beginning. Gold and platinum will both have to name and describe that one tier 2 intervention, just one, which includes all the pertinent data, instructional time, predictability, increased opportunity for feedback, all of the core areas of an intervention or an evidence-based intervention. And then want to make sure that, here we go, what's the process look like? Report the percentage of students responding to this positively. And what we're looking for is at least 70% of those students should be responding positively. So look for that intervention, that evidence-based intervention, I should say, that is specifically working positively and can provide a narrative for us. Again, we're not looking for a novel. We be clear and concise as long as you respond to each of these bulleted items clearly and effectively. It should be succinct and it should be accepted. Then we move on. We're going to up the ante here, and let's take a look at more of the intensive interventions. So we're looking at tier 3 interventions. This is only for a platinum level. Prior to applying, make sure we're looking on the Center on PBIS for guidance on what that entails. There's multiple documents that we should take a look at, but I'm going to refer you to one specific document that you're going to upload or provide a link to. So review these documents. Here are some more resources for you to use. That cultural responsiveness field guide that would be very very important for you to take a look at. Please review the Tier 3 brief on functional behavior assessments. As long as we get ourselves wrapped around what the FBA process looks like and making sure that it is contextually fit for the students, that's a beginning. Now with that knowledge, we then move into naming and describing that one Tier 3 intervention, following the same steps as we did at Tier 2. So how is this going to provide access for this student incorporating PBIS aspects, making sure it's predictable, safe, increased opportunity for feedback, increased instructional time and support. As we continue down, same steps that we're including. How is this progress monitored? And reporting the percentage of students that are responding positively. Again, at least 70% of the students should be responding positively. Now here is the one lift. Here's the bonus, as Denise mentioned here. We would like you to link the Appendix C from your TFI. It's the Tier 3 Support Plan Worksheet. This is what you're using to help score your TFI. So the team should already have this readily available. We would like you to provide that hyperlink to that document so that we can take a look and correlate the data for you. So that's one part. That is the final piece of the puzzle for Platinum. Moving along. Criteria 6, we're looking at the academic portion of your integration of PBIS at campus. And what we're looking at is this, really the crux of this in years past has been an area where multiple errors would come up because we're not including both the pre and post assessment data. So we're looking for pre-assessment and post-assessment data in whichever whatever academic measure that you're using across the school year. Choose one curriculum. We have multiple choices here that you can choose from: iReady, SRI, MAP, DIBBLES, your district assessments, something of that measure along the way. And then we also take a look at which student group are we going to be focusing on. So I need a pre and a post, or we would like a pre and a post, and then select a student group to work with. So that's the beginning portion. Then we move to the next stages. Now we report a narrative on the core group, the pre and post, which subgroup are we focusing on, and do a deep dive into what actually occurred. Again, we're not looking for a lengthy narrative, but we would like to have a way to kind of take a sneak peek or a snapshot, so to speak, of the practices that you're putting into place and showing how the students have grown throughout the year. With that being said, I'm going to pass it back to Denise.
All right, everyone, let's wrap this up. Criteria 7 is the last criteria. Again, not much update here. We just want to make sure it's all clear. So when we go to the next slide, you'll see that specifically for gold and platinum, we want to make sure that your narrative description for a virtual visit, in other words, for our sites that cannot do a physical visit, we want to make sure that your narrative includes details about what you did, like how you were able or how your ACER was able to verify your application, including randomized virtual interviews with students and staff. So the reason why this is coming up is because that this has been a difficulty before. And so when we bring up these details in this webinar, sometimes it's just to make sure that we're clear on the criteria. So you'll still be needing to do the classroom walkthrough, and those tools will be linked in the slides that you get. But we want to, again, just make sure that the details are clear if you do a virtual walkthrough. And on the next slide, you'll actually see the walkthrough tool, which is linked on this slide. So when you open the slides that Rafa shared in the chat, you'll be able to see the classroom walkthrough tool, and you'll notice that it's been simplified a little bit. So there isn't the virtual classroom section on here anymore. It's just assuming that all walkthroughs are happening in person. But of course, if there still is a reason to do a virtual version, like we talked about on the previous slide, you are still, of course, able to do that along with your ACER. And then we want to make sure that you don't miss these phenomenal resources inside of this document, the Supporting and Responding to Students' Social, Emotional, Behavioral Needs document. It's incredibly helpful. These tools link directly to the classroom practices that are outlined on the classroom walkthrough tool. So in other words, this can be used as follow-up after the walkthrough. So maybe we noticed a trend during the walkthrough of needing to connect our PBIS expectations more to relevant instruction. And so we could click on 1.5 and see what are the recommendations for other resources or lessons we might teach or approaches we might take. So please don't skip this phenomenal resource. It is hyperlinked inside of this document that's linked on the slide. As we kind of wrap things up here, we want to make sure, of course, that you know who your region lead is. You'll see we've divvied up the entire state into 11 regions, as Luke mentioned at the beginning, and you can find out who your region lead is or liaison on pbiscalifornia.org. And we are available to help you out for whatever it is that you need. You've got ACER questions, or you need a local coach, or you need to find out who your region lead is, please make sure that you reach out to us. Just a quick note, like overall, some of the common pitfalls that we see throughout all of the applications that we receive and review every year, there's kind of three biggest trends of mistakes that we see. Typing errors. Of course, we understand, one or two things happen. Of course, you're typing a lot into a Google form, which is why we suggest that once the application worksheets are available, grab that worksheet, make a copy for yourself, and put all of your answers in there first so you can work on it over multiple days, along with multiple team members, so that when you are ready to actually submit, you just copy and paste directly from your worksheet. Because we want to make sure that you are, whatever you intend to say is what really gets input into your application. Now, we want to make sure also that your answers are complete. Sometimes we see that someone maybe started typing an answer and then jumped down to a box down below and never finished the answer up above. We have to score your application based on whatever was input into the, or whatever was actually submitted. So we want to make sure that your answer is complete. But as it says on here, and as we reminded you, it doesn't have to be huge. You can be succinct as long as you cover all the relevant information. And then, as I emphasized for criteria 4, please, please, please make sure to align your action plan. So whatever TFI item or items, if you apply for a higher level award, make sure that the item that you choose is aligned directly to the action steps that you outline. The solution has to match the item. If it doesn't, then that item is considered an error and would not pass through as a completed application. Now, throughout today, you'll notice in the Q&A section of this webinar, Ginny and a couple of my colleagues are furiously answering questions. Most of those questions, or a lot of those questions, especially the trends that we see in those questions, will be gathered together into an FAQ sheet on the California PBIS website. So you can check back there to find answers to some of your most burning questions. And the webinar recording will also be posted there so that if you have any colleagues who maybe missed out from today, they can still watch from the webinar recording, which will be posted on the website shortly. And then, of course, one more piece of information that I want to share with you before I pass things back to Luke is that we will have office hours available again this year. This was something that we started last year that was a huge success. As dates got closer to the application window closing, we offered across the state office hours. So you could come and learn from colleagues. You could ask questions. Things were done differently in different regions depending but you can always attend a time from a different region if that's what works in your schedule. So we'd love to see you for one of those office hour times so that we can help make sure that your application process is as smooth as possible. And now let's pass it back to Luke.
All right, thank you, Denise. Okay, so just a couple quick announcements about upcoming California PBIS events and activities. On February 11th at 1 o'clock, we will have our coaches network. We'll be publishing the topics soon. I dropped the link to register in the chat, so we encourage you to attend that. In particular, if you are a PBIS coach, we do set that up as a Zoom meeting, so and we do breakouts and have opportunities for interaction. So a really good learning opportunity. And then we also want to, of course, tell you about our 10th annual California PBIS conference. It will be October 8th through October 10th in Sacramento. So we're hoping to have you there. We're going to do a number of new and exciting things this year, including a reception. So we'll have more details about the conference coming out soon, but it is our 10th, so we're pretty excited about that. All right, with that though, we do have some extra time, and this tends to be a fruitful time for question and answer. So feel free to keep dropping any questions you may have in the question and answer in Zoom. But I also know that there were some themes that were showing up. So I'll invite my colleagues to turn their cameras on if they like, because I may call on you to provide your thoughts here. So one area in particular that there was quite a few questions in the chat on was the new ACER process. So we call that ACER 2.0. And I just want to clarify that every school that applies for recognition must do so with an ACER, with a newly certified ACER 2.0. So if you had previously been an ACER, you need to recertify this year. So if you're supporting a school, that's going to be really important. And you want to do that soon, because that process does take several weeks to complete, because you have to complete readiness. That needs to be reviewed. And you'll need to sign up for one of our trainings that are held throughout the state or virtually. And then there is a quiz following that training, and it's a tough quiz. So not only do you have to go, really pay attention on that training. Another area that there were quite a few questions on were with respect to Tier 3 and the TFI. So there's a couple of things to really pay attention to, and I'll call on some folks here in a second. There's two pieces to the TFI for the TFI for Tier 3. One of them are the standard key features that you score 0, 1, 2, just like you do for Tier 1 and Tier 2. The other is Appendix C, where you evaluate behavior plans. So a lot of questions on whether or not you can use a student that has an IEP as part of this process. And I think you have to take those questions and think about it from the Appendix C, which is the support plan evaluation, versus the TFI actually. So Jeannie, I'm going to maybe have you unmute as you're typing away and looking at me like you don't want to, but I know that you've done quite a bit of work on the Appendix C, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that piece around general education student, special education student. Whose plan can you use in the evaluation using Appendix C?
Yeah, you can use a student who is receiving special education services or general education services. It doesn't, there's no distinction. I would say in my experience, there aren't a lot of general education students who have behavior plans that meet all of those features, but kudos to you if you have that in place. So that may be unusual to come across a behavior plan for a student in general education that has all those features noted.
All right, thank you, Jenny. And I'm going to share real quick my screen and show folks what that tool looks like here. So let's see if it'll go. There it goes. So in the TFI, page 31, here's the worksheet. And you can see that there's specific TFI items And the TFI wants you to evaluate 3 plans at least and look for these features and score with that. So Jenny just clarified specifically around the worksheet. One thing I want you to think about too, though, there's the other TFI items for Tier 3, and you really want to look at your holistic Tier 3 support system in those questions. So there may be questions there where if all you're doing, your only Tier 3 support options are for students with IEPs, that might influence your score on those. So just know that. So your Tier 3 support should be comprehensive. So as you go through and you're scoring, something to think about. All right, so those were a couple of questions. I'll also just pause here and ask my colleagues any other questions that they saw, maybe theme-wise, or they just didn't have a chance to answer in the chat. And Ginny, I see your hand. Why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, there was just one question that just came through in the Q&A about should the Appendix C be scored together as a team, or the ACER help to facilitate this in advance of Tier 3 administration? And others may do this differently. The way that I do it is I ask for the behavior plans ahead of time. It just helps save time so that I can make sure that we have all the right documentation at the meeting. But I would definitely go through it as a team with your ACER 2.0. Go through the Appendix C and score it together to make sure everybody's agreed on how that's scored.
Thank you, Ginny. Also, there were some questions in there about some of the changes that were made. So California PBIS, we have a recognition committee in our larger leadership team review recognition data every year in our larger data set. And there's 2 things that we're generally trying to do with recognition. One is we want to advance high quality PBIS. So PBIS is changing, as you all know. And so we include a lot of items that we want to use to push and stretch folks to either explore new content, which you'll see in our items that have folks read documents like the TFI companion guide or the cultural responsiveness field guide, but also with some of the questions that we ask. So we're trying to use recognition to push PBIS forward. The other reason that we change things is we work really hard to limit the errors that could occur through the process. So we think that recognition should be reinforcing to schools. And one of the worst things that happens is the school works really hard to apply for recognition and then doesn't get the level that they applied for. So we make a lot of changes to our criteria, to our application. We add things like office hours. Those are our improvement efforts that we use to push that work forward. And ACER 2.0 was part of those processes. So we revamped ACER 2.0 to increase the rigor of PBIS in California. So we want even better implementation, right? We want that implementation to better match the key features called out in the TFI. And then we also want those folks that are helping schools to be as fluent as possible with PBIS so that they can be the best support for schools in this process. So wanted to call that out as well. And then I'll pause here again. Any questions, themes that folks are seeing in the Q&A and or questions that we have not had a chance to answer yet?
I saw one question stated a little differently a few times about, hey, we're just going to apply for gold, and if we don't get it, we'll get like silver, right? And so like not necessarily, you still have to meet the criteria for silver. So so don't just apply for something even though you don't think you qualify for it, because you might end up with nothing. So if you have any questions, I recommend reaching out to your coach or your technical assistance center and just looking more carefully through the criteria to make sure that you're applying for the right level.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ginny, for adding that piece. And looking at several questions on Tier 3. Some questions on, there are specific Tier 3 interventions, so things like prevent, teach, reinforce. So for Tier 2 and Tier 3, one change, and I think it got mentioned already, is we do want schools to provide a little bit of information about whatever tier 3 intervention that they're calling out for recognition. So this comes into play at the gold and platinum level. So gold will ask for some information on a tier 2 intervention, and then in platinum, tier 2 and tier 3. In both cases, we're asking for more detail on what the intervention is specifically. So before we might have gotten a response that was unclear. So now we want more than a name, we want a description. And then we have some guidance in the worksheets and in the application regarding specifically what we're looking for. So good news is there's guidance galore everywhere. The bad news is there's a lot of guidance, and we're going to really ask that you and your ACER, and if you have a PBIS coach, really dive into that. Okay, pause there. Again, any other themes, questions folks are seeing?
Just a general comment, folks are excited about the office hours opportunity again this year. And then some people were asking for the link to register for the Coaches Network, because we'll have a little breakout session on ACER and criteria at that time too. Does somebody have that to drop in the chat?
I dropped it earlier and I just dropped it again. Hopefully, I think it's working for folks. I saw there was a question on the last day to register, and I don't have the Zoom up for that, but usually we leave that open up until pretty close to the day. Ginny, I know you're on that committee. I don't know if you know that exact date or not.
I'm actually not on that committee, but I don't know the date.
Ginny's on every committee. That was a fair guess. Okay, other questions. There were quite a few questions too on the pilot item. So the pilot item, to clarify, it is a pilot item. We do use those data. This is, again, one of these areas where we're wanting to push schools, nudge schools into furthering their work. So I know there were some questions on that. Jeremy, as you were looking at the chat, I know that's an area that you've worked on. Were there any questions that you saw in particular that you wanted to answer, or do you feel like most of those got answered in the Q&A chat feature?
I think most of them were covered there. Yes, the breaking down data by student group is just really a skill set and a system we're really hoping that is adopted widely and really taken seriously by each school site. And this is an opportunity for us to help support that without it being a formal component of the recognition process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy, for jumping in with those details. And as a reminder, your regional technical assistance centers, so those 11 regional TA centers, all have folks that are well-skilled and fluent in disaggregating those data. A lot of us in particular around the school-wide information system, or SWIS, but also the underlying math that's involved. All right, any other themes or trends that have come up that we want to address, team?
One more on the tier 3 question with BIPs and FBAs. A couple of folks have asked, maybe at a smaller school site, if they only have one available, how is that allowed?
Okay. I think in the guidance, I'm looking at the tool right now. It does call out 3. It does say if there are only 1 or 2 plans available, score the TFI feature as 2 only if all plans are scored at 2. So that's the official guidance from the TFI. So the official answer is to look very carefully at Appendix C, and there is specific guidance on how to address the number of schools, and that's where we'll direct folks to. All right, as a reminder, we will post this webinar as a recording. It takes us a couple days. The application should go live, I believe, today. So keep an eye out this afternoon. You will see the website changing after this webinar. With that, unless my colleagues have anything else, I think we will start to wrap here. All right, well, on behalf of California PBIS and the California PBIS Recognition Committee and my wonderful colleagues on this call, I will thank you for joining us, and we will sign off. All right, thank you, everyone.